Commander Ethan Cross had always possessed what his academy instructors charitably called selective awareness of social protocols, which was diplomatic speak for completely oblivious to anything that might get him killed. This particular character trait had served him well during negotiations with insectoid hive queens and crystalline energy beings, but was about to be tested in ways that could reshape galactic politics or end his career in spectacular fashion. Haven's Gate Station hummed with the controlled chaos of 50 different species conducting business in the neutral territory between three major star empires. As the human diplomatic attaché assigned to monitor interspecies relations, Ethan had grown accustomed to the sight of beings whose biology defied conventional classification and whose customs ranged from merely peculiar to genuinely hazardous to witness. He was reviewing trade agreements between the Centaurian Mining Consortium and the Vegan Agricultural Collective when the station's atmosphere changed with the suddenness of a decompression alarm. Conversation stopped mid-syllable, footsteps halted, and even the ambient lighting seemed to dim as if the station itself had drawn breath and forgotten to exhale. The crowd in the main concourse began moving with the coordinated precision of a military formation, creating a wide corridor through the center of the space. Aliens from dozens of species, blue-skinned Altarians, insectoid vegans, even the normally arrogant Syrian diplomats, pressed themselves against walls and bulkheads with expressions that ranged from reverence to outright terror. "What's happening?" Ethan asked Dr. Yelani, the Centaurian trade representative he'd been working with. The blue-skinned diplomat's normally composed features showed something approaching panic. "The Crimson Scourge," she whispered, her voice carrying the tone reserved for natural disasters and incurable diseases. "Empress Kithara Vex of the Andorian Empire." Ethan's xenobiological training immediately catalogued what he knew about Andorians, humanoid species, advanced military technology, empires spanning 40 star systems, ruled by hereditary monarchy with absolute authority. What his briefings hadn't adequately conveyed was the visceral impact of actually encountering their sovereign. She entered the concourse like a force of nature wearing imperial regalia. Kithara Vex stood tall enough to meet Ethan's eyes despite the flowing cape that seemed to defy gravity, her silver hair cascading in waves that caught light that wasn't there. Her skin held the pale luminescence characteristic of Andorian nobility, but it was her eyes that commanded attention. Crimson as fresh blood and twice as striking, scanning the assembled crowd with the predatory awareness of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. Her entourage followed at a respectful distance, military officers whose decorated uniforms suggested they'd conquered more star systems than most species had ever visited, advisors whose expressions carried the careful neutrality of people who'd learned that disappointing their empress was a career-limiting mistake, and enough armed guards to outfit a small invasion force. The crowd's reaction was immediate and absolute. Every alien in the concourse either bowed deeply or averted their eyes, following protocols that apparently stretched back generations. Even the normally obstinate Syrian diplomats pressed their faces toward the deck plating like children caught misbehaving. Ethan, who had spent the last 5 years studying xenobiological diversity with the enthusiasm of someone who found beauty in the infinite variations of life throughout the galaxy, watched with open fascination. She moved through the space with fluid precision, each step deliberate and controlled, her crimson gaze sweeping across the assembled beings like a scanner searching for threats or signs of disrespect. The silence was so complete that Ethan could hear the soft whisper of her cape against the deck plating and the subtle hum of what appeared to be energy fields built into her ornate armor. Her beauty was undeniable, classical features that suggested both intelligence and determination, a bearing that spoke of absolute confidence, and an aura of power that made her seem larger than her physical dimension suggested. But it was more than physical attractiveness that held Ethan's attention. It was the combination of grace and authority, the way she carried herself like someone who had never encountered a problem she couldn't solve through application of will and superior firepower. As a xenobiologist, he found her fascinating. As a human male, he found her stunning. As someone with questionable awareness of diplomatic protocols, he continued staring with the frank appreciation of someone observing a particularly magnificent specimen. Their eyes met across the crowded concourse. The effect was immediate and electric. Conversations that had already stopped somehow became more silent. The crowd seemed to collectively hold its breath, waiting for either execution or divine intervention. Kithra's crimson gaze locked onto his with the precision of a targeting system, and for a moment that stretched like the space between stars, they simply looked at each other. Ethan saw intelligence burning in those remarkable eyes, along with surprise that suggested she wasn't accustomed to being observed so directly. She took 3 measured steps in his direction, her entourage trailing behind like planets following a particularly dangerous star. The crowd parted before her with the efficiency of water flowing around an obstacle, leaving a clear path between the Empress of the Andorian Empire and one apparently suicidal human diplomat. "You dare look at me," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that had commanded fleets and conquered worlds. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Ethan realized that everyone in the concourse was waiting for his response. Dr. Yolani made a small sound that might have been a prayer or possibly a farewell. Several other diplomats were already composing what appeared to be incident reports. Ethan smiled, the expression carrying all the natural warmth that had made him effective at interspecies relations and was about to either revolutionize galactic diplomacy or get him vaporized by Imperial guards. "Only because you're beautiful," he said. The silence that followed could have been packaged and sold as a luxury product. Empress Kithra Vex, conqueror of star systems and terror of 3 galactic sectors, stood perfectly still for what felt like several geological epochs, her crimson eyes wide with something that might have been shock. For the first time in living memory, the Crimson Scourge appeared to be at a complete loss for words. The look that crossed Empress Kithra's face could only be described as the expression of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality had just been gently but thoroughly rearranged. Her crimson eyes widened, her perfect composure wavering like a shield generator under unexpected bombardment, and for several heartbeats she simply stared at Ethan as if he were a mathematical equation that had somehow achieved sentience. "Beautiful," she repeated, the word emerging from her lips like she was testing an unfamiliar language. Ethan nodded, apparently committed to his course of action despite the growing certainty that he'd just made the kind of diplomatic mistake that would require footnotes in history books. "Strikingly beautiful, actually. I hope that's not inappropriate to mention, but human cultural protocols generally encourage acknowledgement of aesthetic appreciation." The assembled crowd watched this exchange with the horrified fascination of beings witnessing either a historic moment or a spectacular execution. Dr. Yolani had gone so pale that her blue skin appeared almost translucent, while several other diplomats were discreetly backing toward the nearest emergency exits. Kithra's military escort shifted restlessly, hands moving toward weapons with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who'd served their empress through dozens of campaigns. But she raised one hand in a gesture that froze them mid-motion, her attention entirely focused on the human who had somehow managed to surprise someone who thought she'd encountered every possible form of interaction. "No one," she said slowly, "calls me beautiful." "Really?" Ethan asked with genuine curiosity. "That seems like an oversight. I mean, I understand that you're primarily known for military conquest and political authority, but surely someone has mentioned that you're also remarkably attractive." The Empress blinked, a reaction so human and unexpected that it sent whispers through the crowd like ripples across water. "They call me the Crimson Scourge. The Iron Empress. The Terror of the Outer Rim." "Those are impressive titles," Ethan agreed diplomatically. "Very intimidating and politically useful. But they don't really address the aesthetic component of your presence, do they?" Kithra stared at him with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle that kept changing its parameters. Are you attempting to court me, human?" "Not exactly," Ethan said, though he felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I'm attempting to answer your question honestly. You asked why I dared look at you, and the truth is that I found you visually striking enough to warrant observation. Among humans, that's generally considered a compliment rather than an act of defiance." "Compliment," she repeated, testing the word like she was examining exotic technology. Their conversation was interrupted by the rapid approach of a military aide whose decorated uniform suggested he'd participated in enough conflicts to outfit a small museum. He saluted with crisp precision before speaking in the rapid, urgent tones reserved for crisis management. "Your Imperial Majesty," the aide said, his voice carrying barely controlled panic. "Priority communication from Admiral Blackstone. The Zephyrian Republic has launched simultaneous attacks on 3 border worlds, Kepler Station, the Arcturus mining colony, and the civilian settlement on New Harmony." The transformation in Kithra was immediate and complete. The woman who had been struggling with the concept of compliments vanished, replaced by the military commander who had conquered 40 star systems. Her crimson eyes hardened to the consistency of crystallized starfire, and her bearing shifted from curious to lethal with the efficiency of a weapon being armed. "Casualties?" she demanded. "Unknown, Majesty. Communications are sporadic, but preliminary reports suggest coordinated strikes designed for maximum infrastructure damage. They attack while I'm engaged in diplomatic proceedings," Kithra said, her voice carrying the cold fury that had made her name synonymous with military retribution. "They think to find us vulnerable." General Vorth, her chief military advisor, stepped forward with the confident bearing of someone who'd advised his empress through campaigns that redefined galactic warfare. "Your Majesty, we should return immediately to coordinate the response. The fleet stands ready for immediate deployment." "Yes," Kithra said, but her gaze lingered on Ethan with something that might have been regret. "The Zephyrians will learn the price of their aggression." Ethan found himself speaking before his diplomatic training could stop him. "Your Majesty, if I may suggest, military retaliation might be exactly what they're hoping for." The entire Imperial entourage turned to stare at him with expressions ranging from shock to murderous intent. Offering unsolicited strategic advice to the Crimson Scourge was the kind of action that typically resulted in summary execution followed by intensive diplomatic negotiations to prevent interstellar incidents. "Explain," Kithra said, her voice carrying the dangerous neutrality of someone deciding whether to be offended or intrigued. "The timing suggests they want to provoke a massive military response," Ethan said, his xenobiological training shifting into the analytical mode that had made him effective at understanding alien psychology. 3 simultaneous attacks while you're at a neutral station, in full view of diplomatic representatives from dozens of species. They're not just attacking your territory, they're challenging your reputation." "My reputation requires defense," Kithra said coldly. "Absolutely," Ethan agreed. "But there might be more effective ways to defend it than conventional military retaliation. Ways that would demonstrate not just your power, but your strategic brilliance." General Vortha's hand moved to his sidearm. "Human, you presume to advise the Empress on military strategy?" "I presume to offer perspective," Ethan corrected carefully. "Sometimes an outside viewpoint can reveal solutions that aren't immediately apparent to those directly involved in the situation." Kithra studied him with the intensity she'd previously reserved for tactical displays during fleet engagements. "What kind of solutions?" "The kind that would make your enemies fear your intelligence even more than they fear your fleets," Ethan said. "If you're interested in hearing them." The silence stretched between them like the gravitational field of a black hole, warping everything around it. "Dar." Yelani appeared to be contemplating whether it was too late to request a transfer to a safer assignment, like perhaps cataloging solar radiation inside active stars. Finally, Kithra spoke, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been curiosity. "Very well, human. You may accompany us aboard the Starfire Dominion. I find myself interested in your perspective." General Vorth looked like he'd just witnessed his Empress announce her intention to juggle live antimatter, but he nodded with the discipline of someone who'd learned that questioning Imperial decisions was significantly more dangerous than following them. "However," Kithra continued, her crimson gaze fixing on Ethan with laser precision, "if your advice proves less than valuable, you will discover that being called beautiful was the least dangerous thing that happened to you today." "Understood, Your Majesty," Ethan said, wondering if his diplomatic insurance covered incidents involving conquest-happy alien empresses and questionable strategic advice. As they prepared to leave Haven's Gate Station, he realized that his simple compliment had somehow evolved into a military advisory position aboard the most feared warship in the galaxy. It was, he reflected, exactly the kind of situation his academy instructors had warned him about when they'd mentioned his selective awareness of social protocols. But as he caught one more glimpse of Kithra's remarkable crimson eyes, he found himself thinking that some risks were worth taking, especially when they involved getting to know the woman behind the terrifying reputation. The Starfire Dominion was exactly what Ethan expected from a flagship designed to project imperial power across multiple star systems, massive, intimidating, and equipped with enough firepower to rearrange the geography of small planets. What he hadn't expected was how efficiently the ship's command center operated, with officers coordinating fleet movements and intelligence analysis with the precision of a symphony orchestra performed by people who understood that hitting the wrong note could result in catastrophic military failure. Empress Kithra stood at the central tactical display like a conductor directing movements of cosmic significance, her silver hair flowing as she gestured toward holographic representations of the attacked worlds. The crimson glow of her eyes reflected in the display panels, creating an effect that was both beautiful and slightly terrifying. "Status report," she commanded, her voice carrying absolute authority through the bridge's communication systems. Admiral Blackstone's image materialized in the tactical display, his weathered features showing the strain of coordinating defensive operations across 3 separate star systems. "Your Majesty, initial damage assessment indicates surgical strikes against communication hubs and transportation infrastructure. Casualties are lighter than expected, but strategic capabilities have been significantly degraded." Ethan studied the tactical information with the analytical skills that had made him effective at understanding complex alien social structures. "Your Majesty, may I ask about the tactical objectives of these specific targets?" General Vortha's expression suggested he was still processing the fact that a human civilian was asking strategic questions aboard an Imperial warship, but Kithra nodded for him to continue. "Communication hubs and transportation networks," Ethan said, highlighting the affected systems on the display. "They're not trying to inflict maximum casualties or capture territory. They're trying to isolate these worlds and force you into a predictable response pattern." "Which would be?" Kithra asked, her tactical mind already following his reasoning. "Massive military retaliation to restore communications and demonstrate imperial power," Ethan said. "Exactly the kind of overwhelming force projection that's made you famous throughout the galaxy. And you believe this would be strategically inadvisable?" General Vorth asked, his tone suggesting that questioning imperial military doctrine was approaching heretical territory. "I believe it would be strategically predictable," Ethan corrected. "Which gives your enemies opportunities to prepare countermeasures and propaganda responses." Kithra moved to stand beside him at the tactical display, close enough that he caught the subtle scent of her presence, something like starlight and precision engineering. "What alternative do you propose?" "Psychological warfare," Ethan said, calling up his knowledge of human military history. "Instead of responding with overwhelming force, respond with overwhelming intelligence. Make them fear your strategic brilliance more than your firepower." He gestured toward the tactical display, highlighting communication patterns between the Zephyrian forces. "They've isolated these worlds, but they haven't actually captured them. They're waiting for your retaliation to justify escalating to full warfare. So we deny them the escalation," Kithra said, understanding dawning in her remarkable crimson eyes. "We respond with solutions they haven't anticipated." "Exactly," Ethan agreed. "What if instead of attacking their forces, you simply made them irrelevant?" Admiral Blackstone's image flickered as he processed this unconventional approach. "Your Majesty, with respect, how does one make enemy military forces irrelevant?" Kithra smiled, and Ethan realized he was witnessing the expression that had made her legendary among military strategists. "Commander Cross, explain your proposal in detail." "Use their own strategy against them," Ethan said, his excitement building as the plan developed. "They've isolated your worlds to force a conventional military response. But what if you bypassed their isolation entirely?" He highlighted alternative communication routes on the tactical display. "Emergency quantum communication networks, deployed by stealth vessels while their attention is focused on the blockaded systems. Restore communications without engaging their forces directly. They would be trapped maintaining blockades of worlds that are no longer actually isolated, General Vorth said, his strategic mind grasping the implications. Their entire operation would become pointless overnight. While simultaneously demonstrating that Imperial intelligence capabilities exceed their countermeasures, Kithra added with growing enthusiasm. They prepared for war, but we respond with solutions that make war unnecessary. She turned to face Ethan directly, her crimson gaze carrying something that might have been approval. This approach would require precise coordination and flawless execution. It would also require someone they wouldn't expect to be involved in Imperial strategy, Ethan said. A human diplomatic observer whose presence would suggest this is a peaceful resolution rather than military maneuvering. You're volunteering to participate in active Imperial operations? Kithra asked, her tone suggesting this was either the bravest or most foolish thing she'd heard in recent memory. I'm volunteering to help demonstrate that the Crimson Scourge doesn't need overwhelming force to achieve overwhelming victory, Ethan said. Sometimes the most powerful response is the one your enemies never saw coming. Working together over the next 4 hours, they developed a strategy that combined Imperial technological superiority with human psychological insight. Stealth ships would restore communications while diplomatic channels suggested the Empress was considering peaceful negotiations. The Zephyrian forces would find themselves maintaining expensive military positions that no longer served any strategic purpose. During their collaboration, Ethan found himself increasingly impressed by Kithra's tactical brilliance. She processed complex strategic information with remarkable speed, identified weaknesses in enemy positioning that he'd missed entirely, and coordinated multiple simultaneous operations with the efficiency of someone who'd been managing galactic-scale logistics for years. You know, he said during a brief break in the planning, I've worked with military strategists from a dozen different species, and I've never seen anyone coordinate complex operations with your level of precision. Kithra paused in her review of deployment schedules, her crimson eyes showing surprise at the unexpected compliment. It's necessary for effective Imperial administration. It's more than that, Ethan said. It's artistry. You don't just solve strategic problems, you solve them elegantly. Elegantly, she repeated, the word carrying the same unfamiliar quality as when he'd called her beautiful. Like watching someone conduct a symphony of cosmic forces, Ethan said, then realized he was probably pushing the boundaries of appropriate workplace conversation aboard an Imperial warship. But instead of offense, Kithra's expression showed something that might have been pleasure. No one has ever described my strategic planning as artistic. No one has ever called you beautiful either, Ethan pointed out. But that doesn't make either observation less accurate. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent alert from the ship's intelligence officer. Your Majesty, we're detecting unusual communication patterns among the Zephyrian fleet. They appear to be coordinating with Imperial vessels. The bridge fell silent as the implications processed through everyone's tactical awareness simultaneously. General Vortha's face went pale, Admiral Blackstone's image flickered with what appeared to be controlled panic, and several junior officers exchanged glances that suggested they were witnessing the kind of treason that redefined galactic politics. Imperial vessels? Kithra asked, her voice carrying deadly calm. Yes, Your Majesty. Ships from our own fleet are providing intelligence to Zephyrian forces. Ethan watched Kithra's expression transform from strategic focus to something approaching volcanic fury, and realized that their crisis had just evolved from external threat to internal betrayal. Someone within the Imperial fleet was actively working against their Empress, and the psychological warfare strategy they developed might be the only thing standing between them and a full-scale military coup. It appears, Kithra said with dangerous quiet, that our enemies are closer than we anticipated. The revelation that Imperial ships were feeding intelligence to enemy forces transformed the bridge of the Starfire Dominion into what Ethan could only describe as controlled fury given tactical expression. Officers moved with the efficient precision of people who understood that discovering treason in their own ranks was both professionally devastating and personally dangerous. Kithra stood at the central display like a statue carved from barely contained rage, her crimson eyes scanning intelligence reports that painted an increasingly clear picture of betrayal. "Show me the communication logs," she commanded, her voice carrying the kind of cold authority that had made entire star systems surrender rather than face her displeasure. The tactical display materialized holographic representations of message traffic between Imperial vessels and Zephyrian forces, the data streams forming patterns that suggested coordinated intelligence sharing over several months. Ethan studied the information with growing comprehension and mounting concern. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "this level of coordination suggests the conspiracy isn't opportunistic. It's been planned for an extended period. With the specific goal of undermining Imperial authority," General Vorth added, his face showing the kind of professional outrage reserved for discovering that trusted colleagues had been actively working against everything he'd sworn to protect. Admiral Blackstone's image flickered in the communication array, his weathered features showing strain that went beyond managing military operations under fire. "Your Majesty, I've been reviewing personnel records and fleet assignments. The pattern suggests involvement at the highest levels of Imperial command structure." Kithra's hands clenched into fists, her normally perfect composure showing cracks that revealed the woman beneath the Imperial persona. "Who?" she demanded. "Admiral Drax, Your Majesty. Your former strategic mentor." The silence that followed could have been weaponized and deployed against enemy formations. Ethan watched Kithra's face cycle through emotions that ranged from betrayal to fury to something that might have been deep personal pain. "Drax," she said quietly, the name carrying weight that suggested years of trust and professional relationship. "He taught me fleet coordination, strategic planning, the fundamental principles of Imperial military doctrine. Which explains how the conspirators anticipated our standard response protocols," General Vorth said grimly. "They know our tactical preferences because they helped develop them." Ethan found himself speaking before his diplomatic training could advise caution. "Your Majesty, this might actually be an advantage." Every person on the bridge turned to stare at him with expressions that suggested offering strategic analysis during a moment of personal betrayal was either remarkably brave or spectacularly tone-deaf. "Explain," Kithra said, her voice carrying dangerous neutrality. "They know your traditional tactics, but they don't know the psychological warfare approach we've been developing," Ethan said, his xenobiological training shifting into the pattern recognition mode that had made him effective at understanding complex alien motivations. "Admiral Drax taught you conventional Imperial strategy, but he's never seen you collaborate with human diplomatic methods." Understanding began dawning in Kithra's remarkable crimson eyes. "They've prepared countermeasures for the Crimson Scourge, but not for the strategic innovations we've developed together." "Exactly," Ethan agreed. "They're expecting overwhelming military retaliation because that's how you've always responded to threats. They're not prepared for elegant solutions that make their entire operation irrelevant." General Vorth studied the tactical displays with renewed interest. "The conspiracy depends on provoking conventional warfare to justify a military coup. If we respond with unconventional success, we demonstrate that collaboration produces superior results to traditional Imperial doctrine," Kithra finished, her strategic mind already adapting to the new parameters. "We prove that evolution in leadership method strengthens rather than weakens Imperial authority." Working together with renewed urgency, they refined their psychological warfare strategy to account for internal betrayal as well as external threats. Stealth operations would proceed as planned, but with additional objectives, exposing the conspiracy while simultaneously demonstrating that new approaches to Imperial leadership could achieve better results than traditional methods. "Admiral Drax expects you to respond with massive force projection," Ethan said, highlighting communication intercepts that showed the conspirators' preparation for conventional warfare. "Instead, we restore communications, neutralize the external threat, and expose the internal betrayal simultaneously. A triple victory that validates innovative leadership," Kithra said with growing satisfaction. "Show them that the Empress who accepts input from unexpected sources is more dangerous than the one who relies solely on established protocols." Their planning was interrupted by an urgent alert from the ship's security chief. "Your Majesty, Admiral Drax is requesting permission to board the Starfire Dominion for emergency strategic consultation." Kithra's smile carried enough predatory satisfaction to make several junior officers step back unconsciously. Grant permission. But implement full security protocols. Your Majesty. General Vorth asked. If Admiral Drax wants to continue his conspiracy aboard my flagship, Kithra said with dangerous pleasure, we shall provide him with the opportunity to do so under carefully controlled circumstances. 30 minutes later, Admiral Drax materialized in the bridge's main transport chamber with the confident bearing of someone who expected to be welcomed as a trusted advisor. His decorated uniform spoke of decades of loyal service, his weathered features suggested experience with galactic-scale strategic planning, and his overall demeanor indicated someone who was about to make the kind of miscalculation that would become legendary among military historians. Your Imperial Majesty, he said with practiced deference. I came as soon as I received word of the Zephyrian attacks. The fleet stands ready for immediate retaliation operations. How thoughtful of you, Admiral, Kithra replied, her voice carrying the deceptive warmth of someone who'd just been handed all the evidence she needed. Tell me, what kind of retaliation operations do you recommend? Overwhelming force projection, naturally, Drax said, moving to the tactical displays with the confidence of someone who'd advised Imperial strategy for decades. Multiple fleet deployments, coordinated strikes against Zephyrian infrastructure, the kind of response that reminds the galaxy why the Andorian Empire remains supreme. The kind of response, Ethan said quietly, that would justify a military coup if it appeared to fail due to intelligence leaks to enemy forces. Drax's confident expression faltered as he noticed Ethan's presence and processed the implications of a human civilian participating in Imperial strategic planning. Your Majesty, I wasn't aware we were including alien observers in classified military discussions. Commander Cross has been providing valuable insights into alternative strategic approaches, Kithra said, her crimson gaze fixed on Drax with laser intensity. Approaches that have proven remarkably effective against enemies who thought they understood Imperial tactical preferences. Alternative approaches? Drax repeated, his voice carrying the strain of someone whose carefully orchestrated plan was encountering unexpected variables. Watch, Kithra said, activating the main display to show real-time intelligence from the Zephyrian blockaded worlds. The tactical display revealed the results of their psychological warfare strategy. Communications had been restored to all three worlds without engaging enemy forces. Zephyrian blockades were maintaining expensive positions that no longer served any strategic purpose, and intelligence intercepts showed growing confusion among enemy commanders who prepared for conventional warfare but found themselves outmaneuvered by solutions they'd never anticipated. Impossible, Drax said, his professional composure cracking like poorly maintained hull plating. The Zephyrians were prepared for standard Imperial response protocols. They were, Kithra agreed. But we didn't use standard protocols. We used innovation, collaboration, and psychological insight to achieve victory without the massive casual ties that conventional warfare would have required. Drax's face cycled through expressions that ranged from confusion to growing comprehension to what appeared to be panic as he realized his conspiracy had not only failed but had been completely outmaneuvered. Your Majesty, this deviation from established Imperial doctrine has proven more effective than established Imperial doctrine, Kithra interrupted, her voice carrying the cold satisfaction of someone who just demonstrated superior strategic thinking. Which raises interesting questions about why certain Imperial officers were so confident that conventional responses would fail. The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of ship systems and the soft whisper of data processing as evidence of Drax's betrayal accumulated on the main displays. Communication logs showed months of intelligence sharing with Zephyrian forces, coordination that could only have come from someone with access to the highest levels of Imperial strategic planning. Admiral Drax, General Vorth said with the formal precision reserved for charges of treason, you are hereby confined pending full investigation of your communications with enemy forces. Security personnel moved to flank the Admiral, their movements carrying the professional efficiency of people who trained for exactly this kind of situation. Drax's shoulders sagged as his decades-long career in Imperial service collapsed around him like a poorly designed space station. You don't understand, he said, his voice carrying desperate urgency. The Empire needs strong leadership. traditional leadership. This collaboration with aliens weakens imperial authority. Does it? Kithra asked, gesturing toward the tactical displays that showed their complete strategic victory. Because from where I stand, collaboration has just achieved better results than traditional methods ever managed. Ethan found himself speaking, his diplomatic training providing insight into the psychological dynamics at play. Admiral, you're not really concerned about imperial strength. You're concerned about change. About the possibility that imperial power might be enhanced rather than diminished by working with others. The Empire has always been supreme through strength alone, Drax insisted. The Empire has always been supreme through superior strategy, Kithra corrected. And superior strategy includes adapting to new circumstances and incorporating the best ideas regardless of their source. As security personnel escorted the former admiral from the bridge, Kithra turned to face Ethan with an expression that combined professional respect with something deeper and more personal. Commander Cross, she said formally, your strategic insights have proven invaluable to Imperial operations. I would like to offer you a permanent position as cultural liaison and strategic advisor. Your Majesty, Ethan replied, I would be honored to accept. Excellent, she said, then paused with the slightest hint of uncertainty. There is, however, one additional matter we should discuss. Yes. Earlier today, you called me beautiful. You were the first person in my entire life to see me as something other than a weapon or a symbol of power. Her crimson eyes met his with an intensity that made the space between them feel charged with possibility. I find myself curious about what other observations you might make if you had the opportunity to know me better. Ethan smiled, the expression carrying all the warmth that had started this extraordinary day. Your Majesty, I think you're not just beautiful and brilliant, I think you're someone who makes everyone around her better at what they do. And I'd very much like the opportunity to prove that assessment correct. Then you shall have it, Kithra said, and Ethan realized that her smile was even more remarkable than her tactical genius. 6 months later, the Andorian Empire had revolutionized its approach to both warfare and diplomacy, with cultural liaison Ethan Cross and Empress Kithra working together to develop strategies that combined imperial strength with innovative collaboration. Former enemies now sought peaceful resolution rather than risk facing the unpredictable brilliance of leaders who'd learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the universe was simply seeing someone clearly and telling them they were beautiful. Their partnership had evolved into something that enhanced both their professional capabilities and their personal lives, proving that even the most feared rulers in the galaxy could benefit from being appreciated for who they were rather than just what they could conquer. The Crimson Scourge had become something even more dangerous. A leader who understood that true power came not from being feared, but from being respected, admired, and occasionally reminded that she was beautiful.